Warning, the following video has flashing lights and also includes content that may be deemed inappropriate for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Steve Stockton, the legend. I see. You have decided once again it is time for Midnight Lycanthropy here on LordeStarfox Radio. Thank you for awakening me from my slumber while bringing me some gifts. Absolutely delicious. Now that I am fully revamped, recharged, and ready to hunt, Mr. Stockton and myself are ready to take a walk into the madness.
Stood up. I said, oh my god, it's a werewolf, and everybody in the car freaked out.
My creatures of the night, yes, once again, you have decided to tune in to another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy. Steve Stockton from Missing Persons Mysteries has made his way into the Fox Den to sit around the late night fire as we burn the timber into the early hours of the morning. Steve, how the heck you doing, my friend?
Doing good. That late night fire sounds good. I wish I had a fire to sit around. It's 19 degrees right now in my part of Massachusetts, and this house that we live in is 120 something years old. It's drafty and cold in here. So I'd love a fireplace.
Yes, I can only imagine. If it makes you feel any better, it is 16 degrees here. Yes, I definitely have felt the chill recently for sure.
Yeah, we've still got about between 5 and 8 inches of snow on the ground, which turned to ice because there was freezing rain on top of it. So might be able to get out this weekend.
Excellent. Shoveling and all of that stuff stinks for sure. But I mean, I do enjoy New England. That's definitely the worst part.
Yeah, definitely.
It's brutal. What else you been up to, man?
That's about it. Just holding it the road, working on some new stuff for Missing Persons Mysteries. Got a couple of books that I'm working on that'll be out this year. Number, I believe it's 21 and 22 or 22 and 23. I lose count.
Excellent. Yeah, you recently put out a video that is totally awesome. I can't use the exact terminology on my thread because I'm a small time YouTuber here and they slap us around like crazy. The smiley face unalivers, and anyone out there will know the latter part of that is an interesting aspect that I encourage everyone to go over and check out.
That one was a lot of fun to put together, kind of a little documentary style there. It's about an hour, a little over an hour long, but I think there's something there. There's a lot more cases. That's an updated version of that original video, but I could probably do either another update or a second installment in that. But it's really strange. I believe there's something there. A couple of ex agents have been working on that, and interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting. I believe out of all the things I've seen put together presentation wise, yours is definitely top notch. So everyone out there, if you have not heard much about this, I would encourage definitely going over and checking out Steve's thread for sure.
I appreciate that.
I appreciate you, man, just being truthful. Steve and I both cover similar topics, but also different topics all in one, if that makes sense. He covers the whole entire topic of missing people in the national forest. Obviously, I would help anyone out that is looking for a missing person, but I am in a very smaller aspect of that, meaning I look for missing people as well. You get near cave systems and national forests that line up with these strange animal sightings we have and footprints and vocalization. So we're one and the same, yet if to the audience you like to hear a much broader version of that, Steve's the one you want to go to for sure. Again, I had heard about the smiley face thing since I was younger. It was really intriguing. It being into what it is that I really find interesting in the topics that I cover now as a photojournalist, it's definitely important to look at it, anything that catches your peak. But as an investigative photojournalist, I've come across so many things over the years that have piqued my interest, yet I wasn't in a proper situation to really document it or have a good team around me. Whereas now, with the topics I cover, I have yourself, I have my science team, I got all my hosts, I got a real plethora of opportunities to really heavily invest my time into the side of the spectrum that we kind of fall into, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate what you're doing there. You've got an excellent team put together, and your research is top notch. And the investigation side as well as the folklore and the legend side. And I think it's good that you strike a balance between the two, because everything's not cut and dried. There's a lot of gray areas when you look into these things. And there are people, missing cases that I've covered, where there is some sort of cryptid that plays into it, whether it be Dogman, Bigfoot, um, some other unknown cryptid. But there's that aspect to some of these cases, not all of them, but there's enough to warrant looking into.
Reach, my friend. Thank you so much for those kind words coming from a legend such as yourself that I now get to sit and talk that bi-weekly, and I get to text you, and you're one of my great friends. Appreciate
Yeah,
that very kindly. It's all one and the same. Bottom line, people are missing. All right. So it
yeah.
doesn't matter whether it's in a cave system or just in the middle of a field. Yet we try to, as you said, just make sure we can divide it, try and get the proper people to look into it. Unfortunately, no matter what, people always get a lot of preconceived notions. And I've noticed a lot of people like to play in their own puddles and not get outside information, or like a tracker, for example, that one of my hosts was dealing with, immediately came to a conclusion on the track, which is all right. I mean, that's fine. But then as Lee presented him other things that should have been looked at, kind of refuted the answer that this tracker gave Lee. He had no response to it, meaning in his mind, this tracker already came to the conclusion this is what it is, which is not a good way to approach it, because if there's other information and analytics pointing towards it isn't this, it needs to be looked at. But unfortunately, some people just kind of get too much of an ego that they won't step down for a second. Listen, meaning a lot of people in the Sasquatch field, people that I used to be a lot of fans of, to be honest with you, once I either got a chance to interact with them or heard of them interacting with others about things we were trying to present to them, they wouldn't take a second to hear us out. They're willing to talk about Bigfoot and such, and a lot of them are willing to then dive into these things called like bat squatch, sheep squatch. Okay, totally fine. But then here, because the term dogman, they poo-poo on it immediately, even though we got audio, we got footprints, we have all kinds of things that should be looked at, and it's always just been baffling to me.
Yeah, it's disconcerting, because I believe, you look at every angle, every possible thing out there. That's like I've got a series of videos about the missing and the Fey theory, where there's the fairy realm is taken into account. And if you look back historically, uh, particularly in the Celtic countries, the fairy folk, that's almost a religion. to those people, plus the Native American legends. All different tribes from coast to coast here in the States, they have legends of the little people. And you have them in the Smokies, you have them, the Pukwudgies here in New England, you have them out west, some of those tribes. But people that readily believe that maybe Bigfoot or UFOs or something like that are taking people, you mentioned the Fae, they want to snicker at you. But I put just as much credence in that as I do anything else, because if you look at the broader picture and go into some of the historical documentation, there are all types of Fae. There are hairy giants. There's your Bigfoot. There are different types of there was a case from the 1700s in Ireland where a man described two little men in a flying horseless carriage that he had an encounter with. Modern times, that's a UFO encounter. Again, all this falls under the umbrella of the Fey folk, the fairy folk. So I believe it's worth looking into. I mean, you've got giants, you've got elementals, you've got little men. Who knows? I try to keep an open mind about everything.
It's beautiful stuff right there. Why do you think it is modern day science per se, or just people in general, tend to twist their nose up towards certain versions? Honestly, do I believe in every cryptid out there? Of course not. Like I've said before to you, there's so many on these icebergs. Yet, if someone was able to present me really quality evidence, such as I have with the topic I'm looking into now, then of course I would sit down and actually look at it, take it as something that might have some credence to it. Why do you think it is, though, everyone just tends to ignore the lore and the history aspects, but then also someone could be like, oh yeah, the Loveland Frogman, but then like you said, you mentioned something about a fae, they laugh. It's like, wait a second, time out. You're gonna tell me a bipedal frogman is more believable than the aspect of the fae, but yet the fae has way more actual credence and lore to it than the frogman, which has just a couple sightings.
Yeah. And who knows, the frogman may fall under that Fey umbrella as well. A lot of these creatures, there are different hierarchies and different levels of the Fae. So I think it bears looking into.
Yeah, that's some excellent stuff right there, my friend. Before we start diving into two encounters from my area of the woods, one of them I personally got to work on, and another one I got to go to the area, yet the initial family had moved out, new family had moved in. Being up in Maine, you don't really just go onto people's property. If
Yeah.
you haven't been invited, you would hope someone, answers the door kindly. Yet I have unfortunately heard stories of people just getting blasted because somebody steps on your property. Unfortunately, I was unable to get a hold of the new family to see if anything has continued. Before this, though, I've been diving into 11 missing park rangers that I'll gladly share their names with you at some point for sure if you're interested. They all fall into the area that I try to investigate. A couple of them real quick, not even going to talk really about it because we're here for another thing, but just quick examples. One was found with his backpack. He isn't found, but his backpack's shredded with these huge claw marks that don't really match up to any sort of predator that should be in that area. And they're pretty high up in different areas, like on the tree around. Just didn't really add up. His boots were found just set down in the middle of the trail almost, which I've heard about that creepily enough in a lot of Dogman and potential Bigfoot cases. Then you have somebody else, people hear him scream. He's, again, never seen. They find his jacket ripped up or cut by something sharp. They're not fully sure, or that's what they're telling us, more or less. And there was blood on his horse saddle. Yikes. And the final one I just wanted to kind of mention real quick is another one disappears. And then when they do find this ranger, they find his skeleton. Parts of it are missing, which they're not sure why they're missing. But then all around in this cave where they found him, there's all these old medieval and maybe even older occult symbols. I'm not sure because I don't specialize in the occult if it ties into like some of those ceremonial things with like werewolves or if it's just satanic stuff in general, which is what we're trying to figure out. But absolutely bizarre. These are people that are pretty highly trained.
Yeah, and that the boots, that's I come across that a lot in the missing person stuff that I covered. There's something to that, where the person won't be found, but their boots are found. That just, I mean, if you're lost in the woods, I think the last thing logically you're going to do is take your boots off and set them down. So I don't know, but it happens in a lot of cases.
So bizarre. It does happen. I have a hypothesis that I'd like to push into a theory that the Sasquatch or Dogmen or whatever else cryptid base that might be doing this or that are responsible, maybe even feral people that don't have modern day type clothing. I've heard cases where they've tried to put it back on the bodies, but they've put it on wrong, more or less. Like the shirt was on backwards, kind of, and the buttons weren't buttoned the way they're supposed to, meaning almost as if whatever is doing this understands these clothes belong back on these people, but other times they're folded kind of or thrown really high up in trees,
Yep, yep.
which doesn't really make sense either because sure, if someone's out in the woods taking their clothes off running around, well, most people want their clothing back, male or
Yeah.
female. And what's the point of throwing it so high up? It's so bizarre, dude.
Yeah, a lot of cases like that too, where the clothing's found folded, or like you said, placed up in a tree, or there have been cases where the people were found with their clothing on backwards or inside out, things like that. It just logically it makes no sense, but you have to look at it from an illogical perspective to try to make sense out of it. No sense makes sense in some of these cases.
Is that not the truth? And before I start diving into this, what do you think is the reasoning for that? What's your personal thoughts? Because I'm baffled.
I kind of like your idea of it there, where whatever puts the clothes back on them, it gets the idea of clothing, but they don't quite know how to do it. It'd be like I used to have a little dog that would bring his sweater to me when he was cold. He'd try to get it on himself. But he understood the concept, but he just couldn't do it. I mean, he'd stick his head through the armhole or something like that. I see it as something like that, that they get the basic concept of, okay, they wear this, but I don't know how they wear it because I have no frame of reference for it. So I put it on backwards or I button it sideways or, that's again, that's just speculation, but that's all we can do in a lot of these cases because there is no, you can theorize all you want, but until we actually know, we don't know. And that's the way you have to take it.
Boom. Right on the straight edge of the nail right there, my friend. I'm with you. None of it really logically makes sense, but the only logical aspects out of the madness is that the aspects of something understands this belongs on them more or less. They try to put it back on. What other reasoning? If you're out there and you're dealing with what happens with hyperthermia, where you all of a sudden get hot, those people never put their clothing back on. Once it's off, you freeze and you're done.
Yeah,
So
the
could
paradoxical undressing, that's a fact, that when you're freezing, your body, the core starts throwing off heat to try to keep the vital organs warm, and you feel like you're burning up, especially if there's alcohol involved. So they'll strip off and then they end up freezing even faster. But yeah, you don't hear about the paradoxical undressing where they're putting it back on. Usually once you take it off out in the woods and freezing temperatures, that's it, you're done for.
exactly, that's more or less what I'm saying. Possibly someone might, in one of these cases, have tried to put their clothing back on. Okay, potentially, but then with these little kids and things, one kid was found unconscious with his clothing all on backwards and things. It doesn't make sense. And he had scratches on his face and said he was following some weird looking dog. They were able to follow these strange tracks that then the snow ended. Okay, what the Christmas trees? Again, why would his clothing ever have come off to be then put on backwards and things? It's just absolutely bizarre, man.
Yeah, it is. Like I said, a lot of it you just can't look at it logically because there's no logic to it, and that's what behooves a lot of people looking for a scientific explanation. You're not going to find one yet that everybody will agree on. I don't think.
Which is excellent because I am, yes, scientific based, but at the same time, you do get to points where you have to look outside of the realm. I mean, I ran through all the parts in my brain as to what's occurring potentially in these aspects that could fall into science of what animal would even think of that. None of them. The only one I could potentially think about that might do something like that is animals that aren't supposed to be native to North America, meaning primates and baboons, which I do think are involved with some of these strange sightings, could, I guess, do that. But again, I don't think a baboon cares if it's going to eat something. It just would rip your clothing off and eat you. I don't see why it would fold it up afterwards, you know?
Yeah, unless it's a very neat baboon, but I agree with you there. It's again, you can't make sense out of a lot of these cases, and but that's just points to the anomalous nature of a lot of this stuff that we deal with. Again, no sense makes sense, and you have to look at it that way and just take it, the empirical data for what it is, and say, okay, it's something we don't understand or we don't know why it's this way, yet it is this way. That's the really perplexing part of the puzzle, I think.
Isn't that excellent, my friend? Well, to potentially update you with some more nightmare fuel aspects, I was really surprised you hadn't heard of one of these. I've talked about it before. Some of the original cases that have been documented in Michigan, where everyone thinks that is where it all started out. We do have sightings up here in Maine that predate that by almost 20 years, give or take.
Yeah.
But up here in Maine, predating Michigan aspects by almost 20 years, give or take, there have been sightings. They just didn't use the term dogman. That kind of did start more or less up in that area. Our science team is thinking maybe they came down from Canada originally, potentially could have came into Maine and then made their way over down through the Great Lakes and Toronto down into Michigan and Wisconsin, or could have just directly came down and correlated up here first, more or less before they came down to the areas where people think of like the Beast of Bray Road. Yeah, up here, the most infamous one in Maine, my area, is the Palmyra case that involves the Martin family. The Martin family only spoke about this once on a show called Paranormal Witness. As far as I know, they are not able to be contacted for interviews now. I don't think they want to be. I have not seen them on any other shows per se, like These Woods Are Haunted or Monsters and Myths in America or anything else that covers these topics. They said it once. I think it scared them so much that they told their side of things. And now that they've moved out and left, again, I don't think they want to be contacted and they don't want to speak about it, which is super interesting, but also not great for somebody such as myself who would really love to get to the actual source, because I do understand, being a former actor and model, how the whole entertainment aspect works. And when things are called reality, they aren't necessarily reality. I always tell people that if there's a writer and producer, it's not reality, meaning even you and I talking right now, as soon as I start editing it, that's no longer reality. Reality would be a full-fledged conversation of you and I just sitting in your living room or my living room or such, and me knocking over your TV remote and you being like, what the heck are you doing, dude? Along the lines of that. People don't really understand, even on these shows where supposedly the guests or whatever or witnesses are telling their encounter, they're being told to potentially glorify it or amplify it in certain aspects. I have numerous guests I work with that have been on bigger shows like that, where the producers have told them to amplify your story. And they're like, no, that's not what had occurred. Meaning, this could also, I'm not familiar with Paranormal Witness, unfortunately. I had saw that one episode. I have been unable to see the rest of the series. I don't know if it's going to fall into line, but again, it's for entertainment. So I do get a feeling that it might not be fully 100% what actually occurred to the Martins, which is a big reason I wish I could speak to them. Yet I do have the best case scenario outside of that with what we have on file. Spring 2007, Madawaska Road, Palmyra, Maine. The Martin family, consisting of Eric Martin, his wife Shelley Rockwell Martin, and their daughter, have moved into an old farmhouse. As they're moving up here, the father has hurt himself recently. The mother now has to more or less work. This is an area that she was originally from, not directly in Palmyra, but it was the closest she could get back home. As winter is finishing up, the daughter and her boyfriend, who now has come up to visit, and the family dogs want to go out and explore their property because obviously it's springtime now and they were cooped up in the winter and they've never had a chance to go out. As they are a pretty decent distance away from the farmhouse, they come across what seems to be this strange burrow or den or just cluster of foliage and such. It just seemed out of place. Well, the dogs immediately started whimpering, pinned their ears back, and bolted towards the house. The daughter and her boyfriend turn around. They're like, what the heck? The boyfriend starts to become a little bit more interested into what's occurring, and then they can hear like rustling and growling inside of this burrow / den. They are alarmed, but still intrigued, and start to try to go a little bit closer. They then see a set of glowing eyes, followed by a set of another glowing eyes. And they act just like the dogs, bolt back to the house. All right. Boyfriend ends up leaving. Everything seems fine. The mother and husband enjoy sitting outside, especially now that it's nice out and they have a porch set up. As they're sitting outside enjoying the night, the daughter's sleeping, family dogs are inside. All of a sudden, the wife, Mrs. Martin, gets a feeling that something isn't right. It's just too quiet and something doesn't feel correct. Looking over at her husband, he also feels a little bit strange, but thinks she might be exaggerating and wants to continue sitting outside. She doesn't really want to sit outside, just thinks something is wrong. All of a sudden, they look over to the cornfield. It's not a huge cornfield. There's other foliage in there, yet it was pushed back from the farmhouse by some gravel. To their dismay, they see at first what looks to be these large canines, like 4 or 5 of them just sitting there. But then they realize they're not sitting there like normal canines. They're kind of sitting more or less how you and I would sit, with your knees up to your chest with their hands down. They immediately become terrified, stand up, bolting towards the door. As soon as they do this, the wolves, or whatever you want to call these creatures, dogmen, werewolves, etc., stand up, start stepping towards the farmstead. They could hear it approaching on the gravel. As they slam the door shut, they're trying to figure out where their dogs are. Well, the dogs are upstairs underneath their daughter's bed, who is sleeping, flipping out. They are whimpering and just, no, they're not coming out. They wake up their daughter. They explain to her what's going on. At first, the daughter's just like, what are you talking about? I'm tired. Most teenagers probably would have the same response as your parents are waking you up in the middle of the night. Yet after hearing how distressed her parents seemed, the daughter also gets up. As they're all looking outside, they see these dogmen things pretty much almost to the porch now, just sitting down, but one's kind of like standing up. It's on the gravel. It's not directly on the house. Well, Mr. Martin isn't allowed to have guns in his house because his wife wasn't about that. Now that they had a huge farm, he had to keep them out in the actual farmhouse. Well, he was injured. He kind of had a gimp knee at this point in time. He had to go out and try to get the guns. He was thinking that, well, the only way I'm really going to be able to do this is hop in my truck, drive over real quick, get the guns, and then speed back, and hopefully it deters these animals a little bit. He sneaks outside as he is getting ready to unlock his door. Of course, the spotlight comes on. Why wouldn't it, right? And then, just like something out of a bad movie, he drops his keys. He's obviously in shock as to what's occurring. Sound of the keys dropping, also the light clipping on. When he did look back up, these animals all had whipped their heads in his direction, and the one that was standing up while the rest were kind of squatted down, sniffing all around, start bolting towards him. He obviously is like, oh my goodness, stumbles back to the house, falls inside more or less because, like I said, he had a gimp leg, slams the door. They get upstairs, all of them. They end up going to the master bedroom, which is on the second floor. But around the master bedroom and around this farmhouse, if people know what I'm talking about, there's a roof that kind of comes out and goes all the way around, where I wouldn't advise it, but you could sit out there, walk around. I guess it's probably not the smartest idea. Either way, as they are on the second floor, they can hear these things downstairs trying to claw at the door, trying the door handles, trying the windows, chattering to themselves, growling as if they're speaking with each other. As soon as they figured out, hey, maybe we can get in here, they start making noise and scratching everywhere. Well, obviously, they came to the conclusion they could not get in through the first floor. These strange creatures leap up now to that second story platform, again trying to look in through the windows, and the Martin family could see the snout outlines and the ear and basically the breath coming up on the windows, the hands coming up. These beings kept on trying to figure out now how to get in through the second story window. They were scratching, communicating again, like yipping and barking at each other. Apparently, this behavior went on through the night until the beginning of sunrise. As soon as the sun started coming up, these animals leapt off the second story platform and then bolted off into the darkness that remained of the forest. After this occurrence, the Martin family immediately figured out a way to remove themselves from the farm, sold the farmstead to a new owner that eventually went and moved in there. And like I said, I have unfortunately not been able to speak to the new owners or the Martin family. I have gone up to the area. It is remote. It is near a game reservoir. And also there are other encounters from around that time frame in the summer that occurred too in Palmyra. Super creepy, super interesting stuff, man, for sure. And like I said, they told their story once, and that's that.
Yeah, that's some story, and it's frightening to think about a siege like that. And you hear that with different types of cryptids, like the Ape Canyon attack in Washington State or Oregon, whichever it was, um, where they were basically, trapped in their cabin overnight while these things pounded it with rocks. You have there's a UFO incident in West Virginia, I think, where the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins, Kentucky, I think, where the people were trapped in their farmhouse. So whatever these things are, every now and then they decide, okay, we're going to mess with the locals here, and then the people having survived these attacks usually, it's a one-time thing. That's the weird part. You'd think that if these animals, cryptids rather, were doing these things, that it would happen more than once in a location. But I don't know if they get their fill, or just that cosmic prankster that's out there, man, that sets these things up.
Excellently stated. That's something that intrigues me as well, meaning if the Martin family would have stayed there longer, do their interactions continue? Does this new family have interactions like that? Are they even aware as to what occurred from the Martin family? Do they even hear anything outside of that? Meaning, if the Martin family didn't tell them why they were selling, would this new owner even care to listen to something like Paranormal Witness? That's what's all so intriguing about it, but also what mixes it up a little bit, meaning we all know that yes, the Martin family was telling their story, but it's not directly from their mouth, meaning they weren't sitting down with you and I. It's been through a process to glorify it a bit. I really just wish I could fully get the raw, unfiltered version. It's super intriguing. And before I read this last one and then we let you get boogieing, what do you think was the reasoning for this? Do you think because the daughter and her boyfriend intruded more or less on these animals' house territory and were rude, sticking their face pretty much up in there? Do you think these creatures then decided, all right, we know where you live too. You want to be like that? We're going to be like this? Or do you think it happened to just be coincidence, meaning they found this den, and then because of that, these creatures tracked the scent back to the farmstead? Or do you think it would have happened inevitably?
I kind of think it was reciprocal. That you intrude on their territory, they're going to come and return the favor. But again, we don't know exactly how these things think or operate. It'd be no different than could be like a shark attack. A shark doesn't set out to malevolently eat somebody. It'd be no different if you're sitting in your living room and a cheeseburger came strolling through and you grabbed it and ate it. So I could see it going either way. But I like to think that the Canaan type creature was just say, okay, you mess with us, we're going to mess with you. This is what happens.
I'm with you on that. And the reason I brought that up is because I have a couple other encounters that there is reasoning to support that, meaning one gentleman was in what he believed was Dogman territory. They thought they had seen a den. He didn't relieve himself right on the den, but, 20, 30 feet away. Because of that, he thinks later that night when he went home, the next morning there was huge claw marks all in his front yard, and also this brand new drywall he had put up outside had really thick, almost like skunk type urine on it. It smelled like nothing he had ever smelled before, but it wasn't like a normal urine. It was almost like an oil, because if no one has ever dealt with skunk pee, one time this girl that was living with us opened the door and a skunk was out there. She closed it in time, but it shot on the screen door that was white, and it was almost impossible to get the skunk urine or whatever off because it was legit like an oil, whereas if you and I were to relieve ourselves, it's in theory, if you're drinking water, more water based, you see what I'm saying? So it's easier to clean up, but it came to this guy's house, urinated all over the place. There is other instances of that, and I've also heard of Bigfoot type aspects like that with Monster Quest, where certain people had relieved themselves and then had rocks thrown at them.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know Sir Brian Bowden or not.
Yes.
He has a similar encounter. That may be the one you're talking about, where they were investigating something. He relieved himself on a tree, and what he described as a several feet tall, like 7 or 8 feet tall, dogman type creature came up out of the bushes, and uh, he didn't mean to challenge the dogman, and he says he feels like that if he had ran, the thing would have chased him and probably tore him apart. But because he stood his ground, the thing was just flabbergasted. Like, how dare you come here and urinate on my tree? Who do you think you are? But he faced him down. That's an interesting story. You ought to have him on sometime and let him tell it.
I love how you just told me that because I have had Brian on here and he actually tells that encounter. And
Okay.
I was actually referring to the squash father, Al, but Al is really good friends with Brian. He was actually with Brian when that encounter occurred. So funny.
And you're extremely right about the skunk spray. When I was a kid, there's a skunk in the yard. The dogs got after it. It sprayed my parents' car, the outside of it, but we never got the smell off of it. Every time we washed the car or if it rained or whatever, you could still smell that strong odor. So I know what type of odor you're talking about. It is an oil base, and it's hard to get off. If it gets on you or animals or things, you can. I've heard you can bathe in tomato juice or something like that helps, but it's hard to get rid of. Soap and water won't cut it.
Nope, it's absolutely brutal, my friend. Great stuff. Well, this last one here, too, I personally got to work on this case, speak to numerous individuals that were involved. To wrap up the show tonight, this is another mind boggling one. We have July 29th, 2023, 3:15 a.m., Grafton Loop Trail, Bethel, Maine. 15-year-old Nathan Beckman is camping with an outdoor specialist group called Overland Summers near a remote part of the 38-mile loop trail that connects to the 9 mountain peaks. Beckman steps outside of his tent to relieve himself when he is suddenly blindsided and carried off into the forest by what later on he said felt like a large dog. Screaming for help as he was being carried off into the darkness, trip leaders burst out of their tents but are unable to find Beckman. The group begins trying to follow the boy's cries for help, but whatever had taken him was making easy work of the dense forest. A search party was sent out at 5 a.m. to find Beckman, led by Maine game warden Preston Palmyra and his canine partner, Gordon. The pair were able to find the teen's missing jacket and hiking boots, but nothing else. At 3:10 p.m., Warden Palmyra heard screaming from a deep part of the forest, followed by some other strange sounds. As he and his dog begin to head in the direction, they find Beckman desperately trying to find his way back to his camp group. When the boy is found by the warden, he was about a mile away from the original abduction site. Beckman's family said in a statement that their son is okay and that the family has no further comments. The thing is, too, unfortunately, when I got a chance to speak to him because he said some sort of large thing that smelled like a dog, felt like dog fur was carrying him off. Well, his parents don't buy into that whatsoever. They don't believe in Dogman. They don't believe in werewolves. They don't believe in any of that stuff. When I was speaking to him, his parents were not really impressed, meaning they were kind of trolling me in the regards of asking if I believed in werewolves and all that nonsense. And I explained to them, not directly. I am looking for correlations of things that are occurring, and we do have strange audio and footprints, etc. They didn't really seem to care too much when in one ear out the other. Yeah, I did get a chance to speak to their child. He said what I just told you, and that's what he reported to the news outlets. And when I spoke to some of the troop leaders, they verified it as well. They never saw this quote unquote animal, but they did hear him screaming and something smashing off into the forest. So the question is, why or how, without a flashlight, could somebody just run blindly off into the forest? Good way to lose your eyeballs. The reason I say that is back in high school and such, yeah, I tried to run through the forest in the middle of the night away from people that were coming to break up a party. I almost impaled my shoulder pretty well, ripped up my clothing. Not going to happen, okay? And you're not going to be doing that at some high speed. Something obviously took him. How did he end up where he was? Why, again, is his jacket and boots missing, right? What took him? Seems to all loop around back to the risk reward. Something grabbed him. All these people came out, started screaming for him. Lights are going everywhere. He's probably obviously struggling. This thing, like we earlier spoke about, if it's putting clothes back on people, obviously has some sort of intellect to grasp what's going on, realizes, well, there's a whole group now coming to look for this kid. This probably isn't the smartest decision. Leaves this kid and runs off. It just, nothing else would make really logical sense. Again, a few weeks later, somebody else I know that was camping in that area recorded some really strange vocalizations that sound like some others that we have from the land between the lakes, other areas that match up to unknown vocalizations. Strange stuff, dude.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes you think again, is this just a one-off, or there are other cases that we don't know about where the abduction was successful? And yes, the person's missing, but we have no idea that it was a canine type, bipedal canine that took them. There's so many unknowns that you can't even begin to factor them in. But it's interesting to think about and research, definitely.
So creepy. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, my friend. Is there anything else you would like to touch base on tonight before we let you get going?
I believe that's it. But I found that the Wolf Pack of Palmyra, Maine was the episode of Paranormal Witness. I think found that. I'm going to go back and watch that. That's really got my attention because it was a pack of them. A lot of times you hear about just a lone dogman type creature. This was a group of them working together, and you got to think, they're canine in nature. They're going to run in packs at some point. So the idea of the pack behavior and mentality that intrigues me. I'm going to dig into this one a little bit.
Excellent. If you find out anything else that I have missed or were unsuccessful at enlightening, make sure to bring it up so I can update that file cabinet in my brain. And that makes me think of Dog Soldiers,
Yeah.
because all of those people stuck in that cabin with the whole squad up. And obviously, that's a movie. The Martins are claiming this really happened. Yet, that probably shows a pretty good depiction of the onslaught of these creatures to the cabin. So, creepy stuff to the audience. Yes, this will be the conclusion of the meeting for the Midnight Society. It is the early hours of the morning, and Mr. Stockton has many things he needs to attend to. But no worries, he will be back very soon, and you can also check out our previous videos in the playlist. Or if you want to get adventurous, just head on over to Mr. Stockton's page. You will see his links in the description and see what he is cooking up. But until next time, stay safe out there and be good people. Thanks for hanging out with us, man. Appreciate you.
Yeah, indeed. Be good to yourselves and each other. I always have a great time here, Star Fox.
My creatures of the night, I do adore every single one of you. And thank you for tuning in tonight. Please like, comment, subscribe, feed the algorithm, share the truth, and I will see you on the next one.